Here to discuss the hearing is CBS News legal analyst Rikki Klieman. Okay, Rikki, so typically these preliminary hearings, they just last minutes. Why then is this now in its fourth day?
This is a complicated case. First of all, you're dealing with 18 defendants, and you are dealing with different charges for groups of them. But then what we have to remember is that you're dealing with charges for each of them. So what you also have here, which we usually do not see, is you have an entire evening of events. 18 defendants. When did they come in to this fraternity hazing? When did they leave? What did they each individually do that may or may not have contributed to this death? Then you have the text messages afterwards, which may or may not show consciousness of guilt. This is a very, very complex case.
So, Rikki, we're getting some new information about this case. A detective has testified today that there was surveillance video in the basement that was erased. What do you think that means for the case?
I think it is very bad news for a defendant or a number of defendants in this case. When you have something like video, surveillance video, even if it might ultimately have been good or bad for a particular defendant, the act of deleting it by the deleter, as well as by those who knew he deleted it, as well as those who may have covered up that it was deleted or not fessed up that it was deleted, that an inference can be drawn against a defendant involved in this conduct. If the case ever goes to a jury, you can have an instruction to a jury that a negative inference can be drawn against someone who destroys evidence. So if the detective knows, or if he and other detectives can prove who is the ultimate deleter and who knew about it, then I think that that's very good for the prosecution. Ultimately, you know what the defense is going to do with it. They're going to do what they keep doing, saying, well, how do we know? Maybe it was exculpatory. Maybe it showed that our guy or guys didn't do anything wrong. And that, how do we know it's someone from the fraternity who deleted this? So you have another brewing of another battle royale on your hands. This is the kind of conduct that goes hand in glove with those texts afterwards that make people look guilty, and the defense will try to make the police look guilty.
So it will ultimately, you think, come up to the judge whether or not to allow this to be taken in one way or another?
Well, the judge can decide what to do with it in terms of probable cause or not. But if this case goes forward to trial, another judge will make a decision. But I think it's worth having in if they can identify who did it. And then, of course, as I say, a negative inference can be drawn. That's a very bad fact for a defendant or defendants.
So, Rikki, when it boils down to this, do you think this case will go to trial?
I do. I don't necessarily think it will go to trial for all 18 on all of the charges against them. But I do think that some of these charges are ultimately going to wind up before a jury.
How long before we know whether it will go to trial?
Well, I think it's a guessing game. I think that it is possible for the judge to come back with a decision tomorrow if, in fact, the evidence is done tomorrow. But what happens if the evidence isn't done? We will be back for another day. The judge may also do what we call take it under advisement, in which case he may not come back with a decision for not only days, it could be weeks. And if that is the case, we will expect not just simply bound over for trial, but we might expect an opinion. And if we have an opinion in this case, rest assured that that will become as much of a guideline for the prosecution and the defense as the grand jury presentment was for this hearing.
And two of the fraternity members actually waived their rights here on this one to a hearing. Why do that, Rikki?
Well, there could be a couple of reasons. It is not unknown. It has happened for the prosecution to be so intent on the defendants who are in front of the court that they kind of forget about the defendants who are not in front of the court. So it tends to minimize their participation in anything. So that may have been a strategic decision, and it may have been as simple as cost. We really don't know.
So if this case does go to trial, Rikki, what kind of sentences do you think these men will face?
Well, the sentencing is interesting because although they are charged with involuntary manslaughter, we would think that that is the greatest offense. However, in Pennsylvania, it is not. It is, in in fact, a misdemeanor carrying a penalty of 4 years. That what we go, 5 years, that ultimately the hardest charge, the charge that is really going to be the be-all and end-all here, is the aggravated assault, which is in fact a felony, and if proven, because you can have recklessness as a state of mind, doesn't have to be intentional, it can be reckless, that is, you had a substantial risk and you went and did it anyway, that if recklessness is the standard and they are, or any one of them is convicted of aggravated assault, that's a 20-year penalty. Big difference.
It is. It certainly is. Rikki, thank you for joining us and making this understandable. There's so much to this case.
Yes, there is, and there will be more to come, because I will be surprised if some of these defendants are not charged and going to trial.
Fascinating. Rikki Klieman, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Serena.